Now we will talk about the Kafka fundamentals, and also we will see that what are the major components that Kafka contains, right? So far, what exactly the example we discussed so far, right? So let's just have some diagram and then we can elaborate. So let's say we basically talked about one car application, and we said that this car online car booking application basically, and this is basically producing some kind of data or informations. Okay, so I'm just writing quickly. So probably this is like the speed info. This is some information, maybe the location location, and also maybe the fare details. And finally we said that ultimately our goal is to like this information has to go into the to get into the server. There is something like maybe this is the specific server, or may we could say that let's say not considered server but maybe some other services, right? So this is maybe my analytics service, analytics to which I just wanted to have, or the analytics part, and some other mobile applications. Maybe this is some mobile that some consumer is there, so they also getting the details in their specific mobile devices and so on. So like that. And we also mentioned that that we also discussed that what are the disadvantage or drawbacks we could say if we just try to get the real-time data and try to store it into the database, right? And we identified that the biggest issue is with like throughput, isn't it? Because we learned that the db has like the throughput of db is always low, whereas Kafka is having the high throughput, right? So as part of this problem solution, we actually introduced Kafka in this specific scenario, right? In this specific scenario. So till that part, this has already been discussed, right? So let's say this is like car booking app, right? So till that part, this is already discussed. So now let's try to focus on this Kafka, that how exactly Kafka works internally. That is something we just wanted to know, right? So to do that, what I can do is we can just try to make some more diagrams, right? So first, folks, if you like see, right? So what exactly this app, if I consider this application, so what exactly this card app application does? This card app is application is actually providing some records, generating some informations, right? So in technical terms, this is, or this can be called as producing. So this card application basically producing some info. So what does this card application called? This card application can called as producer because it's producing some information, isn't it? So say for example, I'm just mentioning here that this is one of my producer. Okay, this is one of my producer. I'm just replicating like this. You can consider this is the specific car booking application. Okay, and now in between we introduced Kafka as part of our solution. So say for example, this is my Kafka instance, and also we already also described couple of mobile devices and couple of other services who are actually taking this information, whatever my car booking application is actually generating, right? So in technical terminology, this part we can mention as consumers. What you can say, that is called consumer, right? Very basic and very easy to understand concept. Producer, someone who is actually producing the information or something which is producing the information, and consumers, which are like basically consuming the respective informations. And how it is happening, it is happening via Kafka. So for the time being, just make this statement very clear, right? One part is consumer, sorry, one part is producer, one part is consumer. Producer is responsible to produce the data or information. Consumer is responsible to read or to fetch the data. And in between, Kafka is the kind of a middleman who is actually taking care of all these things, right? So now, obviously, things are not that much straightforward. Now we need to see that how Kafka is actually doing those things, right? So for understanding, we are just putting some arrow over there, and finally, from here, details are being consumed to the consumer, correct? So now if I try to like highlight this specific portion, this is actually called Kafka cluster. Kafka cluster. So Kafka cluster, just you can remember like this, it's kind of a Kafka server. Okay. So basically Kafka producer responsibility is to write the data into Kafka cluster, and consumer responsibility is to read the data from the specific Kafka cluster, right? Now if we try to get more information about this specific Kafka, so to do that, what we can do is we can draw one more diagram specific for Kafka. This is my Kafka cluster for the time being, so I'm just denoting as like Kafka cluster here, Kafka cluster, let's say, and this Kafka cluster is having few components. Now the question is like, okay, till to that part we have understood that we have one producer, we have one consumer. Producer basically producing the data or maybe writing the data into the Kafka, and consumers are basically fetching out the data, and basically they're reading the data and then using for further process and whatever it's supposed to do. So how Kafka is actually maintaining the data, right? So inside the Kafka, we have few more segments like this. Say for example, this one, and this one. Okay, and these segments are known as broker. Broker. Okay. Now the question is, what is broker? So broker, folks, you can just correlate like this. It's kind of a local storage. It's kind of a storage where we can actually save our respective informations. Make sense? This kind of a storage. So when producer is actually producing the information and write down into Kafka cluster, it is actually selecting some broker, and then that information is actually being stored through the broker into the memory. If it is running on my specific local server, then it can be a local storage. So that is something known as like broker. Make sense? One Kafka cluster can have multiple brokers or broker instances. Okay. And so for the time being, we are only discussing maybe one or maybe one, two, and three, and so on. Okay. And what happens, like, okay, so the question is like, okay, that's the all the things, like, okay, here my producer is here, the producer is actually producing some informations. So and then it is goes down to the broker, and then whenever the consumers are there, so consumer are basically fetching the information from the broker. Is that the all the things? The answer is no. Within the broker also, the informations are getting segregated. Now we will try to expand the broker. Okay. So what we can do is we can take one more diagram over here, and we will try to highlight one specific broker. This is one specific broker for our understanding. Okay. For our understanding here, I am mentioning like broker, and let me just put it here. So now folks, very interesting part. A broker basically contains something called topic. Okay, so within that broker we have something called topic. So topics, so what basically topic does, so topics are nothing but the messages or the logs. Basically, now if I come to the technical part of it or technical terminology, if we mention the technical terminology of it. So whatever producer are being producing as part of the records, for our example, maybe producer are basically producing something like your cab speed info, and then your location info, and so on. Maybe these two, and we are just considering, right? This two type of informations that cab producer, this producer is actually producing. These are basically treated as logs or messages, right? So if you remember, at the very beginning, as part of the Kafka technical description, we talked about something like streams or events, right? So this can also known as like some kind of messages or events that is Kafka is basically Kafka basically the producers are basically producing, right? And it is get stored within the topic. Okay. And now if I again introduced producer here, right? This is my, say for example, this is my producer, and I am also having one consumer, right? So basically like this, the producer is this one, and is the consumer, sorry for the very small arrow like this, right? Okay. So finally what's happening here? So if this is my producer, and producer basically producing certain info, which is going first into this Kafka cluster, then it is Kafka cluster, and within the Kafka cluster some broker has been assigned, and after that within the broker the informations are getting stored into the topic, and finally it goes to the consumer. Okay, so I can just write like info, basically whatever the producer producing from here, it is getting stored over here, correct? One some few points over here, that whenever producer produces some messages, right, or records where basically denotes as a message. So whenever producer producing some messages, that message is actually contains two parameter. One is key and value. Okay, this key and value pair, it is being stored, right? Now the question could be, okay, maybe I am implementing one Kafka and through in my programming, and then I may not handle this probably. Okay, so whatever my producer, so producer actually producing some record, but I may not have handled this, that whatever the messages I supposed to pass through the Kafka, that I supposed to define some keys of it. So in that case, what could happen? So in that case, Kafka automatically assigns some key to it. Okay. So now this is what we have seen as part of the broker and the topic. Now one more question it may like we can have in our mind, that first of all the very basic question is, as we have seen that one Kafka cluster can have multiple brokers. So is that something followed for topic as well? The answer is yes. So we can have multiple topics, right? We can have multiple topics within Kafka. Now, whenever we would like to consume certain records, we need to identify that through which topic we are actually willing to get the data. Correct? Now, the second question can be like, why we need multiple topics? So, if I just wanted to draw one more quick diagram over here, let's say this is my producer, this is my another producer. So, folks, we can have multiple producers as well. Okay? This is my another producer. We have in between a Kafka cluster over here, and I have maybe multiple consumers, right? Consumers also can be multiple, right? So maybe this producer is actually generating some kind of, you can say like cab details itself, like what type of cab it is, right? What is the number, what is the current speed rate of the cab, This producer is maybe producing the cab driver details, right? This producer may be producing the cab location details according to that. And simultaneously, this consumer may responsible to generate the analytics. This consumer may generate may calculate the fare, and this consumer may be some a mobile app which is being consumed by some other application. Just for an example, right? So what how it can be? So it can be like each and every producer going to write the records into the specific Kafka cluster, whatever you have defined so far, right? Sorry about that. Uh, this like this. Something happened with my cursor. Let me just try to uh, let me just try to remove this. Okay. So sorry. So I was having some trouble with the cursor. Anyways, so what I was talking about, like say for example, I have multiple producers, and these producers are producing the certain records, and that is goes into the my Kafka cluster, and I also have the multiple consumers, right? So what could happen, like each and every consumers would like to get the records from the Kafka. Now, in such case, try to think from that perspective that if this is something happened and this is realistic actually that's how Kafka works in projects. So if this type of situation I would like to handle, then how this consumer would know that what could be the specific area from where I can get the information of my location details, how this consumer would know that how what could be the specific area from where I could get maybe driver details of the cab, and so on. So topics are basically helping us to identify that from which portion of my specific broker or maybe the Kafka cluster, what type of records that I supposed to get as a consumer, right? So that's the reason we can have multiple topics as well. Say for example, these all are my topics, and I can just name for my understanding like T1. T1 is my first topic. T1 is my first topic, and then I'm just copying it. This could be my T2, and this could be my T3, right? And finally, let's say this specific consumer would like to consume the topic 1 data. This specific consumer would like to consume the topic 2 data, and this specific consumer would like to get the information from topic 3. So now it has been clear to the consumer that through which portion of the specific Kafka cluster and what type of data I would like to access from, like where, basically the identification. So through the topic we can actually identify. Makes sense why we have the multiple topic related concept over here, correct? Now try to get more like deep dive into the topic, right? So what exactly about topic? We said that topic is something which contain the messages or logs basically produced by producer within the Kafka cluster and within the broker. That's what we have understood, right? Now, if I just try to take out this topic in some other diagram and try to understand that how internally topic manages our informations or messages and how it looks like. Okay, so say for example, this is one of my topic. So we are within the Kafka cluster. So for our understanding, let's say I'm just making one more box over here. This is my topic, and I'm just writing over here like maybe topic 1, and this topic is there, And now we just would like to know that how one topic is actually managing our specific data or messages. So topics are basically a integral part of partitions. So now one more concept introduced, right? Partitions. Now the question is like, then what is partition? Till that part we understood like, okay, producer, consumer, Kafka cluster, broker, and the topic. Then one more thing comes up that is called partition. So partition also very interesting factor, folks, over here. So topics are basically distributed the specific messages or logs in the form of specific partitions, right? So it is something like within the each topic we have something called, say for example, this is small chunks over here. This is nothing but the partitions. Okay, let's say I am just for our understanding purpose, this is P1, partition number 1. This can be like P2, this can be like P3, this is my P3, and finally this is my P4. Makes sense? We will understand that why again we need another layer. Again we need another layer which is called partitions. Now if we again try to drill down this specific partition and how partition basically works, so partitions again internally save our data like this. Let's say this is our memory. These are memory, and this is a certain portion of the memory, right? I just try to. This is the one. Many other cells that we are preparing here, or maybe one more cell. Just trying to draw, and then the one. So within the partition, we have the record saved in the memory like this. And so now here I just wanted to tell one thing, that in like how the messages are being stored. So we have seen something called logs, right folks? Logs. So how we are writing the logs? Let's say this is one of my log file, and whenever I would like to write something within my log file, I always starts from here, right? Maybe something log I'm writing ABC. Then whenever I would like to write something new into the file, I always have to start from the end, isn't it? Like this and this. That means what? Like I'm always starting from at the end, because at the end of the message or end of the log only giving me the new space. So for partition and within the Kafka also, the messages are being stored like this format also. Let's say um, at the very first cell we have some information, maybe one of the information maybe um, ABC. So this is already there. Now one more new information came up which I need to store. So where, in which place it gonna be stored? So in that case the information going to be stored here. So it can be like DEF. Like that the other things going to be followed, like something like GH, and then your 123, something like this, or IJK, something like this, and so on, right? And each and every segments denotes with some number. So this can be like 0, this can be my 1, this can be the 2, this can be my 3, this can be 4, and so on. Probably let's say it is like kind of infinite. Okay, so there are basically no such limit exist. Okay, so question can be, right, that okay, if I storing my specific messages or information in this manner and it is keep on saving like this, then until what number it goes? So there ideally no such numbers or index numbers are being defined. We can store as many records as we want. Now here folks, one more terminology, that whatever the numbering we mentioned here, here, right? Like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. These numbers are known as offset. Offset. Okay, that means what? So Kafka giving us this specific feature that, say for example, I'm accessing this specific topic, which is my topic 1, and within the topic 1, and there are a couple of partitions that been assigned that we got to know. And we also got to know that partitions are basically keeping our messages or specific logs in this manner. Now, if I would say, for example, I wanted to get the information which is there on the log here, like this, in this specific area, maybe in this specific area, right? So now how I can do it, right? So I can access this specific area of the information by defining the offset value, which is 3, right? So that's how Kafka is so much flexible as well, that you not only been able to store a huge number of records and being able to access earliest record of it, whatever being saved in the log file, but also you have the capability where you can define certain offset value and try to fetch the information to that value as well. Make sense? Now if I take one more white space, so far we just learned about the basic Kafka consumer, producer, consumer, broker, topic, and Kafka cluster. Okay. And now if one more thing I just wanted to mention, maybe if I just consider this one, this specific, this specific Kafka diagram. So there is something called Zookeeper. Okay. So if I say this entire Kafka managed by something called Zookeeper. Okay, so Zookeeper's responsibility to manage the Kafka, manage the broker, and if any failures occur, then that is something is managed by Zookeeper. So we literally do not like much bother about like how Zookeeper handle it. And going forward, if we try to implement that, do you need to implement Zookeeper as well or not? So the answer is no, because if we have the Kafka library with it, so Kafka internally implementing Zookeeper as well. It's kind of a manager, you can say, Kafka manager. So is basically handling the Kafka cluster itself, manages the Kafka cluster itself, and whatever the components we learn about the Kafka cluster, like your broker, your topic, your specific partition, and all those things, that is being managed by Zookeeper, right? Okay. So now some interesting fact that is called rebalancing. Okay, that is called rebalancing. So as we got to know that Kafka is actually handled the complex distributed systems, right? And that's the reason, like if we need a specific records, especially the real-time records in terms of managing the distributed systems, then Kafka plays a very crucial role. Now there is a factor that it is called the rebalancing, or also known as like self-balancing. So instead of rebalancing, I can say that self-balancing. So what does it means? Okay. So far, folks, whatever we learned about the something called topics. So let's say if I draw one more diagram over here, let's say this is my expanded version of topic. And in this topic, we have something called partitions. This is one of the partition. This is, say, for example, total 5 partitions I have taken over here, like partition 0, 1, 2, and 3. Now we know that these specific topics are being consumed by whom? Being consumed by consumers. Being consumed by consumers. So if this is the case, then what could happen, like, so this is my topic, right? So I'm just writing over here so that we can have the clarity. This is my topic 1. And within this topic one, we have the certain partitions. Now let's say I have only one consumer at this time. So I am just writing over here that this is my consumer. This is my consumer, right? Only one consumer I have. Now try to think that, okay, if only one consumer I am having and I am having 5 partitions in my topic, then from which partition this consumer going to get the records, right? So basically in this case, from this partition also, my consumer going to get the detail records. From this partition also, my consumer get the record. This partition also and this partition. So basically, from all the partitions, my consumers are actually getting the records, right? That means what? Kafka is basically trying to self-balancing here. Okay. Now the question is, okay, we have understood this factor. Let's say I'm just removing these lines and try to make it a bit more tricky. Let's say I have one more consumer over here. It's a real time, because I just cannot expect that in the distributed system I may have only one consumer, right? I can have multiple consumers. This is one of the consumer, and for example, this is my another consumer, that is consumer 2. Now what could happen? Let's try to think of. So basically in this case, as part of the self-balancing feature, Kafka will try to assign like this. So first two partition going to provide the records or information to the consumer 1, and these two going to provide the information to the consumer 2. Self-balancing. Self-balancing. Now, if we try to make it a bit more tricky, let's say I have introduced, first of all like this, let's say I have introduced one more consumer. This is my consumer 3. Consumer, consumer, let's say 3. Okay, makes sense. Now tell me, which partition going to provide information to this consumer 3? The answer is the consumer 3 going to be an idle consumer, because all of the partitions are already being occupied by other consumers as part of the self-balancing feature. Okay, so this consumer won't get any specific partition as part of the topic to get the information. So it sounds like a bit problematic, isn't it? Right? Because in real life scenario, this is a very basic use case, that your topic, one topic can be consumed by multiple services or multiple consumers. So to handle this kind of scenario, there is something called, or one more topic or one more concept that has been introduced, that is called consumer groups. So before like talking about consumer group, folks, we need to make sure that before this consumer groups, whatever the topic we already described, right? The basics of Kafka and the producer consumer topic and how topics have been managed, partitions and cell balancing, we just need to have a proper clarity, right? Otherwise, it would be sounds like a bit confusing. Now, in the consumer groups, what is the basic modification, I could say, that has been taken up so that this problem can be resolved? So again, if I just try to extend this Kafka topic, this is my topic, and my topic name is same. Let's say this is my topic name. So topic name is topic 1. And again, if I try to draw the same partitions, let's say I have total 4 partitions for the time being, right? And I have one consumer here and one and maybe 3, 4 consumers are here. Okay, but this time we will introduce one more section like this and like this, and this is something we will denote as CG-1 and CG-2. That means consumer group 1 and consumer group 2. That's for just for information, folks, that in Kafka, this consumer by default a part of Kafka consumer group. Even though if you are defined or not defined, it's going to be by default a part of some consumer groups, right? Now let's say we have defined our two consumer groups. One is CZ, like consumer group 1, and another one is consumer group 2. Make sense? Now how this like self-balancing could work. So for this case, for this consumer, right, for this specific consumer, this one going to provide the records here. Records will go like this as it is, right? And now the as per our previous understanding, we will say that okay, as we can see that all partitions are already being consumed by consumer one group, right? Consumer group 1. Then what about the consumer group 2? So here is the like interesting factor, folks. So as part of the consumer group 2, as we have defined our these four consumers within some consumer group 2, that means Kafka will treat as a specific consumer, and it will again provide the information as part of the self-balancing manner. Sounds very interesting, isn't it? So consumer group 1 we have, and that consumer group only contain one consumer. So it is eligible to get information from all the topics, as well as part of the consumer group 2, whatever the consumers I have, those consumer also being able to get all the information from the specific partitions, right? And this is something being handled by following one model, which is called pub sub. So Kafka is basically allocating this type of consumer and publisher model, which is being followed by pub sub, publisher and subscriber models. One more thing, that there is a one technical terminology associated with this. So we said that whenever we are defining some topic, or we would like to get the value from the Kafka, we need a topic, so that consumer can understand that on specific which record that it needs. So consumer has to tell to the specific topic that, hey topic, I would like to access you and I would like to get the information from you, so that consumer, so the topic could understand that I would like to emit the message to the consumers now. And this specific, like this specific thing, whatever, where consumers are basically telling to the topic that, so the topic would understand that I need to start sending the information, this is called subscribe, right? This is called subscribe. So consumer has to subscribe some topic, so this is called subscribe. So consumer has to subscribe to some topic, then only topic would understand that okay, some consumer has subscribed on me and my responsibility to send or emit the specific information to the specific consumer, right? So currently if you are watching this, so maybe there is an subscribe option, right? So if you subscribe my video, so what would happen, like uh, YouTube will get to know that you are interested on this channel, so whenever any new updates are going to be there, so it will keep on, it will keep getting the notifications. Something you can correlate like this. Okay, so consumers are basically subscribe to the specific topic, and based on that, topics are now understood, like okay, now I need to send the specific information to this consumer as well, correct? So this is what Very important and very interesting factor about Kafka. Now, one more thing that we would learn, that is called replication factor. Replication factor. Okay. So now, what is replication factor does? So, folks, as so far we have understood that Kafka is something which is responsible to handle a huge number of data, right? And that is also, it is basically manage the entire record. So if this is my Kafka cluster, within the Kafka cluster, I have something called broker, right? I have something called broker. So it can be like multiple instances. And within the broker, I have something called topic, right? I have something called topic. So if I just need to write, this is my Kafka cluster. This is my brokers, and within this I have, this is my topic, and topic name I'm just providing like T1. Okay, so this is like an overall and very basic type of diagram that we just understood so far. Now, while handling that much of information, or that much of messages or logs, there is a chance, right, that maybe in some instance my one of the broker, maybe this one would get down. Could happen, maybe something happened, maybe it is not able to store the records, correct? Or maybe somehow the storage maybe crashed or something. I'm just taking very random examples. So for such case, if that is something happened, then what could be our catch? How Kafka handles the certain situation? That's the reason Kafka also follows replication factor. That means what? Whenever a consumer producing some information or writes some information into Kafka cluster, then and there Kafka automatically creates this replica. Kafka automatically creates its replica into multiple brokers. That means if this is my broker 1, say for example, this is my broker 1, and this is my broker 2, this is my broker 2, this is my B2. So in both of the brokers, Kafka could contain the same topic as a replication. Same topic as a replication. And at least in real life, Kafka at least replicate the same information 3 times. Replicate the same information 3 times. That means what? It's actually assuring us if something goes wrong with any of the broker or something goes happen wrong, our information won't get lost. We always being able to fetch the information. Now the question is like, if something happened, or maybe whenever producer producing some messages or logs or information into Kafka cluster, how Kafka would know that which broker is to select and how to make this replication factor? Is there something we would like to do? The answer is no. If you remember, we talk about Zookeeper, right? So Zookeeper is kind of playing a manager role, so managing whole the Kafka cluster. So Zookeeper is actually taking the responsibility that whenever Kafka producing the messages or information, or sorry, whenever producer producing some messages or information and gets into the Kafka cluster, Zookeeper will assign some broker, and then and there it will create some replica of it. That means if something goes wrong, then your information or our information, whatever producer is basically produced, that is being safe. Okay, that is being safe. And as part of the replication factor, 2 more terminology are associated, which is called leaders and followers. So what is the leader and the follower? Say for example, This is the producer. This producer produced some info or some messages. Now it is being get into the Kafka cluster. Okay. So once it's gets into the Kafka cluster, some broker going to be assigned to that by our Kafka manager, say Zookeeper. So whatever the broker at the very first has been assigned to keep the record, that is called leader. So say for example, for this case, this broker B1 is something or one of the broker which is being identified by the manager, our Kafka manager, and it is the first broker which is storing the information produced by the producer. So I can say this topic, say for example, uh, this specific broker, that is B1, is my leader. And as part of the replication factor, Kafka will create the replica of this B1, right? And maybe 3 times the replica can be stored within the Kafka cluster. So other replicated broker can be known as followers. The follower's responsibility to replicate the information. Let's say once the leader and followers has been defined, producer now send some update to the existing messages. So followers responsibility to follow the leader and get the information whatever the update has been made into the information and update their existing data as well. Okay, so this is the concept of leaders and followers. Make sense? Okay, so this is what about the Kafka fundamental, Kafka architecture, and the basic component of Kafka, right? Later we will see that how we can implement Kafka programmatically.